If you've ever played any of the Fallout games, then there's a good chance you've come across power armor. I mean, it's on almost every Fallout cover, but if you've played more than one Fallout game, maybe you once had a thought something like this. So extensive use, then why weren't they in any other Fallout game? Or, how did these XO1s get in Boston? Weren't they used about 170 years after the Great War by the Enclave on the West Coast? Well, obviously this is just because Bethesda wanted to have more suits of power armor. But that won't stop me from trying to explain this in a way that would make sense in the Fallout universe. But first, we need to analyze why power armor looks so different in each game. The reason for this change between Fallout 2 and Fallout 3 is clear, in that the original two Fallout games were made by Black Isle Studios, but after losing money for years, Interplay, which was Black Isle's parent company, sold the rights to Fallout 3 and eventually the entire Fallout IP to Bethesda Softworks. So, Fallout 3 was not only made by a different developer to the first two, but it was also built around a different engine, that being Bethesda's Creation Engine. Okay, so the difference between Fallout 2 and Fallout 3 is the developer and the engine. But why is Fallout 4's power armor so different to Fallout 3's then? Well, that can simply be put down as Fallout 3 using the Creation Engine, which is designed for Elder Scrolls. So the power armor was classified as clothing due to the lack of a suitable gameplay feature that would allow the power armor to act in the same way as the original games. If you look at the first two Fallout's power armor, it's big and intimidating, but Fallout 3's is just really thin and doesn't really seem like power armor, more just like a little heavier than regular combat armor. However, Fallout 4's version of the Creation Engine allowed them to accommodate the characteristics of what was essentially a mech suit. They basically made power armor as big and bulky as they could, even adding the requirement of using a power armor frame, as well as the need to use fusion cores to power the power armor. Now that we've been through all of that, which one is canon? Well, all of them technically. Let me explain. Since the new form of power armor is in the two newest Fallout games, we can assume that that's the way Bethesda is saying power armor works. But wait, I hear you say, how can they all be canon if they're different sizes? Well, this can be chalked up to art style. I mean, we all know that Fallout doesn't always have the most realistic art style. So, in the other games, the power armor is the same size as Fallout 4's power armor. It's just misrepresented with the art. Fair enough, but what about how you enter the power armor in different games? The reason for this is, it's a game, and it acts like other items in the game. You don't have an animation for putting on each piece of clothing when you equip different clothes, so neither do you have an animation for putting on armor, or in this case, entering armor. If you look at the back of the armor, you can see handles that would be used to open the armor. In Fallout 4, they simply decided to change this a little bit. Just a little, though. Instead of armor being glued to your clothes, you can equip it separately, and instead of magically appearing in power armor, you have to enter it through an animation. Very long animation, I might add. Then the last change is fusion cores. In Fallout 4, if you didn't know, a suit of power armor requires a fusion core to be inserted into the back of it to power the armor. The only problem with this is that it runs out in about 20 minutes of gameplay. Granted, that is 10 hours in-game time, but that still isn't very long considering how much the Brotherhood, for instance, uses their power armor. And how come you never have to change them in previous games? The only way this makes sense is that the requirement for changing fusion cores is purely for gameplay. Because only you, and only in Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, does this need for fusion cores appear. This is clearly just to balance out the game, since in the previous Fallout games, you could only use power armor a lot later in the game. But in the newer games, you can find it almost instantly. So in conclusion, every power armor suit you use in Fallout games made before Fallout 4 does have a fusion core in it. They just last for so long, you don't have to change it. And in Fallout 4 and later, it's just a balancing reason you have to change fusion cores at all. Now that we've discussed why power armor changes so much in the different games, it's time to look at why there are specific models, or lack thereof, where they should or shouldn't be. To understand this, we need a little backstory on each set of power armor. Now, you should know that this information is according to the newest Fallout games. So, let's go through all the power armor in all the different canon Fallout games in order of how advanced they are, starting from least advanced and going up to most advanced. The Ranger suits aren't actually power armor, but they are related to the discussion. These armor sets were used pre-war by the Marines, the Army, and even the LAPD. This armor was used by the Marines during the invasion of China, but seems to have been mainly used by the police and the military to quell the rioting going on in the states of Nevada, California, and possibly Utah. T-45 power armor was the first power armor to be created and is the most simple. Using steel plates as the actual armor, it proved to be effective protection in combat, but limited the wearer's agility. The Fallout Bible, which is not confirmed canon, states the first T-45 power armor was deployed into battle in 2067. That means the T-45 was first produced around 10 years before the Great War. The T-45 suit first appeared in Fallout 3. T-51 power armor was an improvement over the design of the T-45. Instead of steel plates, it utilized polylaminate composite and custom-fitted parts. This design offered more protection and more movement. According to General Brock's terminal in Fort Strong, the first finished models of the T-51 were shipped to the front in China in 2076. This puts the main production of T-51 around 2 years before the Great War. This power armor was introduced all the way back in Fallout 1. The T-60 power armor was the last widely used suit made before the Great War, due to the T-51 proving too hard to produce in the numbers that the USA required. It's never said what the T-60 was made out of, but we can assume that it's most likely a composite of steel and polylaminate. It offers more protection than the T-51, but less movement. The T-60 power armor was produced and deployed in a very short time frame, only a few months before the war. The T-60 suit was first introduced in Fallout 4. Not much is known about the XO1 power armor, though it is stated in a terminal in the White Springs bunker that it entered development shortly before the war, and by the time of the Great War, it hadn't left the prototype stage. The XO1 saw very little pre-war use and was only used by Enclave members. The first XO1 was seen in Fallout 4. Advanced power armor, not to be confused with XO1, is the power armor used by the Enclave in the year 2241. Its appearance is similar to the XO1, but that's because it's a modified version developed by the Enclave around the year 2215. The advanced power armor first appeared in Fallout 2. The Advanced Power Armor Mark II, or XO2, is, well, the second version of the Enclave's Advanced Power Armor. It was developed sometime after the destruction of the Enclave oil rig in the year 2241, and by the year 2277 is the standard power armor used by the Enclave forces. This power armor was first introduced in Fallout 3. The Enclave Hellfire armor is the most advanced power armor available in the Wasteland. The Hellfire armor had at least one working model by 2080, which is when it was sent to Vault 51. The Hellfire armor was one of the research projects being undertaken at Adams Air Force Base. By 2277, the Enclave had a large amount of these suits. The Hellfire armor was first seen in the Broken Steel DLC for Fallout 3. Now, there are 2 more sets of power armor, but because these are only in Fallout 76, I decided to give the information on them and explain why they're only in Fallout 76 at the same time. The Excavator power armor is power armor designed for mining, developed by Garahan Mining Co. around early 2077. And the reason for this only being in Fallout 76 is that Garahan only developed 3 prototypes before they were shown to be inferior to the Hornwright Mining Co.'s auto miners. The subsequent loss to Hornwright meant Garahan had to cancel the project. Ultrasight power armor is a T-51 suit, but very heavily modded using Ultrasight. The plans for this armor were created through the combined effort of the Lost Hills and the Appalachian chapters of the Brotherhood of Steel. This modified T-51 model requires Ultrasight to create, and Ultrasight is a material unique to Appalachia. That's the Fallout 76 power armor out of the way. Now let's talk about the main suits. To structure this, I'm going to go through all the main Fallout titles and identify why each specific type of power armor is where it is. Then I'm going to go through each game again and identify why every other type isn't there. So, we're going to start off with the game that started it all, Fallout 1. All of the power armor in the original Fallout was T-51. And this was because all of the power armor in Fallout 1 was owned by the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel in this game were located in the Lost Hills bunker, and had been there since they left the Mariposa military base, just a few days after the Great War. The origin of this base was that it was specifically designed to house the research of the FEV project, and when the base was completed on January 7th, 2077, the research team and the soldiers tasked with protecting them, who would later become the Brotherhood of Steel, were moved there. The US government valued this project highly, and because of that, the soldiers sent there were equipped with the latest and best gear, that including the T-51 power armor. Next is Fallout 2. The only factions who had power armor in this game were the Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave. As I already explained, the Brotherhood still used pre-war T-51 suits, but the Enclave had the resources and the time to build new power armor suits for their soldiers. That's why the Enclave personnel, and only Enclave personnel, use the advanced power armor suit. Third is Fallout 3. Again, having the 2 main factions who use power armor, the Brotherhood and the Enclave. In this game, however, instead of T-51, the Brotherhood uses the inferior T-45 model of power armor. This is most likely because of how common T-45 was. T-45 is by far the most common power armor in the Wasteland, due to how much the US produced before the war, and especially in Washington, D.C., where there would have been a high military presence before the war. The Enclave, again, is equipped with their even newer Advanced Power Armor Mark II, that, again, they made, so no one else is using it. Then, in the Broken Steel DLC, the Enclave is also using the Hellfire Armor, which they had back in 2080, but are most likely using them now because of the Duraframe, a material that there is no history being used anywhere before. So we can assume the Enclave discovered this material. Finally, there is one set of T-51 in Fallout 3, but this can't be a regular T-51, because it has the same damage resistance as the Hellfire armor, and the Hellfire armor is in turn better than multiple models of power armor that were already better than the T-51. So, my guess as to why this T-51 is so powerful is that this was an advanced prototype version, and I assume that this specific suit was the sole best power armor in the world before the Great War. I mean, that would make sense seeing as it is the only one you can find, and it's in a secret lab under a military base in the capital of the country. Fallout New Vegas has a lot of different power armor, but the three main factions who had them were, again, the Brotherhood and the Enclave, but this time the New California Republic also had power armor. Again, the Brotherhood has a lot of T-45, which isn't surprising considering the military installations around the area, but going to be honest, I don't know why the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood would have so much T-51. It's possible they took a lot of it with them when they departed from the Lost Hills chapter, but that still wouldn't account for all of it. I think that to have gotten all that T-51 power armor, they must have come across a government facility that would have been important enough to warrant T-51 armor being there. The only place I could think of that would fit this description would be Helios 1, which the Brotherhood did control for a while, but it is possible they discovered them somewhere between Lost Hills and the Mojave Desert. Now to the New California Republic. All the power armor they use is T-45, just like how the Brotherhood would have got them. The NCR most likely found a lot of them at the various military installations located in the Mojave. And even if they didn't get them from there, they are the largest faction in post-war America, so it's also likely that they're getting these power armor suits sent to them from other places controlled by the NCR. Over to the Enclave. In New Vegas, the Enclave is the Enclave Remnants, and is comprised of 5 retired Enclave personnel, and the son of the deceased squad leader. Because they are remnants from Camp Navarro, one of the bases the Enclave held in 2241, they use the Advanced Power Armor Mark 1. The only other power armor found in the game is on the bodies of 2 dead men near the edge of the map past a lot of Death Wars. Since one of these men is wearing the Advanced Power Armor Mark 1 and the other is wearing T-51, we can assume that these were either survivors of the crashed vertibird near Searchlight Airport, or they scavenged the power armor from that crash site. Last is Fallout 4. In this game, power armor is just lying around everywhere, waiting for someone to take it. Now, there's no point really discussing how specific factions got power armor in Fallout 4. It's pretty obvious that they would have just found it lying around. So, I'm going to look at why there is so much power armor lying around in Fallout 4. The T-45 was common amongst all military installations by the Great War, and it still is by the time of Fallout 4, and that's the reason for the T-45 being everywhere. It's just very common. The T-50, on the other hand, was not common at all. The vast majority of T-51 was being sent to support the troops fighting in China. If you look at most power armor locations, they seem like they were being transported, and this is probably why there is so much T-51, because they were being transported to the port or the airport to be either shipped or flown overseas. Now, the new power armor in Fallout 4, the T-60. One of the loading screens in Fallout 4 says the T-60 saw extensive use after the Battle of Anchorage, and that the soldiers in them were trying to retain order on the day the bombs fell. It is established in the Fallout series that riots leading up to the Great War were very common, and the various T-60 suits around the Commonwealth were most likely being used as riot control. As I stated before, the Enclave created the XO-1 just before the Great War, so it's most likely that all the XO-1 suits in Fallout 4 are from before the war, and were being used by Enclave members. I know that the way power armor scales to level in Fallout 4 means that it will spawn as a different model depending on what level you are, but canonically, there should be at most about 3 suits of XO-1 in the Commonwealth. As for how the Brotherhood already has T-60 before entering the Commonwealth, they would have stopped at a few places before the Commonwealth where they would have presumably picked up these suits. That was why power armor was in certain places. Now it's time to look at why specific power armor isn't in those places. Fallout 1 only had the T-51, so why weren't there any other sets of power armor in that game? Well, first, we can easily see why there were no Enclave suits, because the Enclave wasn't in the game. Then, there wasn't any T-45 or T-60, because there was only one military base in the game, and it was Mariposa. And as I stated, everyone at Mariposa had a T-51 suit. As for why there was no power armor in any of the cities, the LAPD and the army in that area had special anti-riot gear already. This anti-riot gear may be the same as the combat armor in the game, but it's also likely that all that gear has been taken by the Desert Rangers already. Fallout 2 is set in the same area as Fallout 1, so the reasons for the lack of the T-45 and T-60 are the same. But now the Enclave's in the game, so why did they only have the Advanced Power Armor Mark 1? Well, the Mark II obviously hadn't been made yet, and the XO1 is the predecessor to the Mark 1, so they wouldn't use an outdated model. But the last suit, the Hellfire Armor, was created by 2080 at the latest. So we know the Enclave had access to the armor, but why didn't they use it till Fallout 3? Well, this may be linked to the fact that we never hear about Duraframe before this. It's quite possible the reason the Enclave hadn't used the Hellfire armor before was because it wasn't very good. And only after the Enclave discovered Duraframe would they be able to create the Hellfire armor that met their requirements. In Fallout 3, the main power armor is the T-45 used by the Brotherhood and the Advanced Power Armor Mark II used by the Enclave. First, let's look at the Enclave. They use the Advanced Power Armor Mark II, which they developed after the events of Fallout 2. So, they don't use the Mark I or the XO1 because they're older and not as good. And the reason you don't see the Hellfire armor until you get to Adams Air Force Base is because the Hellfire armor was being produced there. As for the Brotherhood's power armor, they use the T-45, and apart from the one T-51 suit I talked about before, the T-45 suits are the only power armor suits you can find that would have been there since before the war. So why are there no other sets in DC? Because the majority of power armor was sent overseas to help the troops in China, or was used domestically to deal with the rioting. But the sheer amount of soldiers in DC would mean riots would be much easier to stop. And because of this, the only power armor in DC was the T-45. Power armor is power armor. Sure, the T-45 might not be as good as the other power armor models, but it still gave the wearer substantial protection and increased strength. So it makes sense for the government to send all the better suits to the troops fighting the war and to the places that have less military members but are still dealing with riots. Then the places with large military presence get the more common power armor. And I know that it may seem weird having the worst power armor on the troops protecting the country's leaders, but the soldiers who were actually directly protecting the leaders would have used the XO1. And the reason that's not in Fallout 3 is that anyone wearing that suit would have been evacuated to the Enclave oil rig with the President as the bombs were being dropped. Also, you might ask why the Brotherhood doesn't have any T-51 suits in Fallout 3. This could be because of many reasons, such as they weren't given many when they left the Lost Hills chapter, or maybe they thought it would be easier to use the T-45 model. Because of how many there were, it would mean that they could easily replace broken parts with parts from other T-45 suits, whereas the T-51 would be a lot harder to repair. Finally, Fallout 4 has most of the different power armor models in it, but the few it doesn't have are the post-war Enclave suits. And this is simple because the Enclave never went to the Commonwealth post-war. And so that's the end of the video. I hope I answered all your problems surrounding the lore of Fallout's power armor. And if I didn't, tell me what I missed. or even could have just done better. And with that, if you enjoyed this video, like it or even subscribe if you haven't. But I'm gone. Bye.